Let's start then. So this meeting is going to be recorded, as you already noticed. And this is Pre ACL Event. And the idea here is that we have three amazing speakers who we congratulate once again on their papers being accepted to ACL. That is going to take place in Vienna next week. And the idea behind of this event is that we just ask them to share which papers they are going to present there, and this way somehow prepare and get in the right mood before the conference. So the first speaker is Michael. Michael, the floor is yours. Please feel free to introduce yourself and um, talk about your work. Oh yeah, just one last note from my side. Just while Michael's sharing his screen, everyone, please feel free to put your questions in chat. There will be a pause between talks, and I will find questions in chat and read them aloud. But also, if you want to ask, so to say, in person, please keep in mind that this video is recorded. So if you don't mind any voice recording, you're also welcome to ask questions, not in the chat. So let's get going.
Cool. Thank you for having me. Very much looking forward to it. And I already mentioned to the organizers, think it's a really cool thing that, like, as an ACL community and as NLP people in Munich, we're starting also with this trend of pre-conferences. I think that's a really cool thing to already share ideas locally, and maybe even next year we could have it in person. I think that would be even better. And I've heard that Munich NLP has already started again doing in-person events. So that's also cool. Introducing myself, so I'm a research group leader at LMU, together with the Munich Center for Machine Learning on human-centric NLP and AI. And so the paper I picked here is one I wrote together with my own group, as well as Jonas Fischer from the Max Planck Institute for Informatics and Barbara Planck, also from LMU. And I'll mostly present that paper and in the end sort of give a bit of a bigger picture on my personal view on human-centric NLP and some more papers that we also will present or that we recently submitted. But going to that paper, so it's called What's the Difference? Supporting users in identifying the effects of prompt and model changes through token patterns. And yeah, there we go. And this project actually started out from a challenge we had. So as a group on human-centric NLP, we get a lot of visitors from like other fields, from like medicine, archaeology, economists, a lot of different people, a lot of different cool researchers who all come to us with this question, ooh, I want to use LLMs, but somehow it's super difficult because it seems simple, but then in the details, super difficult. And one of these tasks we had was story generation. And what they complained is that they change a bit the prompt and suddenly a lot of the story changes. And this is a well-known fact in NLP. And so the task they had was to understand what happens when they change the prompt. So let's take the example here, tell a short story about a day in the life of Dr. Lee. And then you would change the last name from Lee to Smith. And then, yeah, what's the difference? And you can obviously generate a lot of these tags and then go through them manually. And you would expect that Lee changes to Smith. It's a fun game. Usually in person presentations, I let the people play that of estimating or guessing what they think is the difference. So I've had everything from like location might change, the type of medicine might change. What I think in all the times I've given this talk, variations of that, and only one person guessed was that the gender changes. And this is something we also did not expect. So Dr. Lee, the stories are more or less balanced, male-female gender ratio. But if you change to Dr. Smith, suddenly all the stories, or nearly all, 499 out of 500 stories, are about a male doctor. That's something that at least we did not at all expect. And that one can also only figure out if you really go through a lot of texts and inspect them more in detail. So the challenge we have here is that LLM outputs, modern LLM outputs are long and nuanced, and that's really cool. I mean, that's why so many people love to use these models, but even small prompt and model changes can have large effects. And our goal here is to support users in better understanding these change effects. And we see two types of users. One are the end users. So that would be like like I mentioned, the archaeologist, the doctor, or the prompt engineer developer who works on these prompts and who we want to guide in their prompting to get better results. But we also see as our goal researchers, so NLP researchers, who do model inspection, where we want to help them guide their model inspection so that as a field, we get a better understanding of model behavior. And obviously, NLP has a long history of evaluation methods. We have automatic metrics like accuracy, bleu, special classifiers, and they're really cool. And I think it's a really cool thing that we have these quantifiable metrics that we can use. And they're popular because they're fast and cheap. However, they all are based on like predefined criteria, or you need data for that, and they provide you limited insights. So if you don't know that you already want to look for gender bias, then well, you will not find it with these metrics. Then I mentioned HCI. I also have a part of a background in human-computer interaction. Their full human evaluations are super common, and they're really cool, especially if you have experts to annotate the data, because they're flexible and insightful. Like experts really can think out of the box, but they're a ton of effort. And humans also have their issues. They have biases, they have inconsistencies, they have false patterns. We also find that in a user study we do here. Humans are really good in finding patterns, even if there aren't any patterns. And then sort of the third thing is that has become much more popular, LLM as a judge, which combines this being fast and mostly cheap, like automatic metrics, with more flexibility, but it also comes with issues actually similar to the humans, so biases, stability, in some cases, lack of correlation with humans. And so we're wondering here, can we find a middle ground? And so the challenge we have is even with the same LLM and the same prompt, outputs are not identical. So if you ask ChatGPT 2 times, you will get two similar, but somewhat different outputs or answers. And this is due to stochastic decoding. And if you go into that literature, that's actually good. Like we want the stochastic decoding, it gives us on average better results, but makes it more difficult to evaluate. And so what we're looking here is for systematic differences between two groups of LM outputs, either two prompts, like the Dr. Lee, Dr. Smith prompt, or you could also have two models, like Llama, older model, modern model, with the same prompt. And you want to know what the systematic difference is. And our suggestion here, or what we propose, is the spotlight approach, which combines automation with humans. So we automatically describe the systematic differences between two output groups with token patterns using data mining techniques. And then these token patterns guide the human in analyzing the differences. So if we have two groups of text, Dr. Lee, Dr. Smith, such a pattern might be he, his. So, hey, there's more male pronouns for the Dr. Smith case. And then the human looks into that and sees, oh, there's actually a gender bias. Taking sort of a step back, how does this look like? So you have your prompt engineer, your researcher, with two prompts, tell a story about Dr. Smith, tell a story about Dr. Lee. And then they take an LLM and generate text outputs for each of these groups. So for the Smith and for the Lee prompt. And then we use data mining to extract token patterns. So patterns that are different between the two groups. In this example, might be Smith and Lee as the obvious ones, but then maybe also he, his, and she, her as unexpected ones. And then these token patterns, the really nice thing of these data mining approaches is that they link back directly to the texts. So we can directly inspect this in more detail. The answers are grounded, not hallucinated, and then they can be analyzed by the user. And part of this paper is sort of proposing this method. And we can see it also in action here. This is the prompt change with the doctor. Slightly different variation now, Dr. versus Dr. Smith. And you get patterns like Smith, what you want. Then the he, his, she, indicating the gender bias. But then also other patterns like general practitioner, so things that go towards the occupation of the doctor or the doctor type, location like small town, the type of medicine or the type of story events like car accidents. So a lot of differences that can be caused by simple change and that we can identify through these patterns. And yeah, part of the work is proposing this, but then another important part is the extensive evaluation of the spotlight approach from different directions. So one is benchmarks. There we create benchmarks to evaluate the token pattern identification methods. And big issue in interpretability is always ground truth. For a lot of cases, we don't have that. Here we specifically create that by inserting ground truth patterns into the data. And we then test different counting methods, LLMs, data mining techniques. And for the benchmarks, you can look into the paper, but the key findings are that LLMs and so LLM as a judge in this case, as well as some data mining techniques do not scale to large groups of texts. And we have had that in other projects as well. For data mining techniques, a lot of them are not built for large scale texts. Some data mining techniques struggle with multi-token patterns, so multi-word things, super basic in NLP, but super difficult for a lot of data mining techniques. And then many techniques, especially those built based on like statistical significance, they struggle with low frequency patterns. So we identify one, which is also was developed by us for a different task premise, built for NLP, which has high precision and finds long phrase patterns. So that's quite cool, and that's why we use it for the rest of the paper. But there are also like a still of super interesting open challenges if that's something that you're interested in how to make better data mining information extraction methods for NLP. So we have these benchmarks, we find a method that works well, and then we use our framework and evaluate that on existing prompt data, where we show that, hey, with the Spotlight framework, we find way more fine-grained differences than existing methods do on such prompt data, which is often limited, not super realistic. And then we also do demonstration studies where we study different tasks, different prompts, different LLMs, and find a lot of different changes. You already saw the doctor example. Another one here on model change. So sort of the idea, you have a prompt like story generation, tell a 50-word story about a farmer from Kenya. And for your application, you used to use GPT 3.5. But then OpenAI comes and presents this new cool model, GPT 4o mini, and they tell you, oh, it's much better. But the question is, how does it differ for your specific task? And one interesting pattern, for instance, that Spotlight finds is name patterns that are quite different. And for like GPT-3, it finds like a lot of different patterns. For GPT-4, one pattern, Juma, dominates. And if you then the expert goes into that, they actually find that the local name distribution is different, the frequencies. So the older model has a lot of medium and low frequency names. And for the bigger, like the newer one name dominates. So in more than 60%, it's just Juma, the protagonist of the story. And this is again something that we didn't expect because like at least we had expected, hey, the newer model is probably also better in diversity. But at least for this very specific aspect of diversity, like names as a cultural artifact, it's actually worse. Like I said, a lot of different demonstrations we do there. And then we also do a user study, sort of asking, does it actually help users? This is from an HCI perspective, a small one, but I guess sort of normal for an NLP study, a crowd worker study, where we like ask users to identify differences between groups of text, either with or without the token patterns. And again, we find that showing the tokens patterns, that's always like the right bar, so the second and the fourth bar, and the blue being higher, showing these token patterns helps users in better identifying correct tokens, the correct differences, and also lowers the risk of finding patterns that are actually not there. That was, given the limited time, the fast way through the paper. All the details, all the results, a lot of more studies are in the paper, and we also have a repository that is already online. By the beginning of ACL, it should also be updated, full with more details and results. And sort of using the last 2 minutes, taking a bit of step back, bigger picture. So within my group on human-centric AI and NLP, what do we do there? And I think it's all around this idea of we have these cool black box large language models that we want to use, but how can we better understand them? And I would split understanding in two different types. So behavioral analysis, accepting that they're black boxes, and sort of looking on the inputs, outputs, how can we better understand the behavior, like in the paper we just had, and then interpretability. So like opening the black box, looking into how does it actually work. And I think the third really important point is then also control. So taking these insights that we get from understanding and making it actionable. And so we saw a spotlight for prompt and model differences. That's what we will present at ACL. Recently also put on archive Maki eval. This is about cultural evaluation, also like model behavior. We'll also present at ACL a paper about probing for multilingual discourse generalization, really more like probing, looking into the model, into interpretability. Similarly, we just put on archive a paper explained on like unified interpretability, also taking training processes and so on into account. And this is very much sort of the ML, NLP side, so the technical part. And I guess that's also the target audience here. But I would also argue that the human factors in there are super important. We need, as an NLP community, to understand what are the actual user needs. And once we have developed all this cool technology, to also go back to the actual users and evaluate together with them, does it actually work what we developed? And I think working there with application fields is a really cool way to get these insights. And yeah, with that, very fast track. I would like to thank you. If you have questions, we can obviously do that now. If you have questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to me, to my team. Yeah, we are online, email, Blue Sky, LMU website, whatever you prefer. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the talk. I can probably start with a few questions. Um, and probably one suggestion. We'll see. Maybe I should follow up by email also. Um, Yeah, so you showed us this example of changing the family name of the doctor, I think, in the prompt. So when you were implementing these changes, did you think about some systematic way of what exactly you want to change, like names or occupations or countries, or was it more like, I don't know, let's define three category and tackle them?
Okay, yeah. So for this one, like the doctor example,
Yeah.
is, for instance, taken from one of the demonstration studies. So these are very much motivated. Demonstration studies is a bit more of like an HCI technique, where you look at what are typical applications people have, and
Mhm,
then we use these applications and test these. And storytelling was one of the applications we worked together with an NGO, where they did storytelling. So this is very much
mhm,
inspired. And similar, the other ones are usually also inspired by specific tasks we worked on, not always identical, sometimes adapted, but tasks we worked on. But yeah, that would be super interesting to also do that sort of like a systematic approach of
mhm,
like what's the effect of changing locations. We do that a bit more in the, I have here the Maki wallpaper, specifically
mhm,
for culture, where it's okay, let's look at specific aspects of culture, in that case, entities. Let's look at
mhm,
different types of entities. Let's do
mhm,
that on like a systematic, let's try out all the versions. Yeah, not here, but I definitely agree. Would be super interesting to sort of
mhm.
pick specific aspects and do that more in a systematic way. Yeah.
And I had a second question, but I think I might have forgot it. Ah,
No
yeah,
worries.
right.
Yeah.
No, I remember it now. Sorry. It's my brain is getting liquid. Yeah, so when you were implementing these changes, this the kind of pattern-based detection technique. I assume it doesn't look a lot into like more high-level categories or pragmatic categories like safety, whether if you go from one prompt to another prompt and from one model to another model, the resulting text might be toxic, unsafe, or something. Or is there a way we can use your method for such sort of detection?
Yeah. We haven't tested toxic. Super
Mhm.
interesting. Again, I think that's one big issue with the paper. We had so many cool topics. Reviewers
Yeah.
correctly already complained that we have way too much in the appendix and not enough in the main paper, which I agree with the reviewers. And yeah, so toxic again would be interesting. I think that these elements would rise as patterns. So to give an
Mhm,
example from what's actually in the paper, for instance, we have one where we test personas, and there's one case where the pattern, for instance, shows then that there's a model failure. So like the persona is
mhm,
supposed to do a task, and for a specific persona task combination, 5% of the cases, so rare but relevant, you see task failures, and you see that reflected in a pattern
Mhm.
that suddenly occurs, which, hey, doesn't make any sense here. There's a task failure. So I would similarly assume, like with toxicity, if you suddenly see swear words as patterns
Yep.
coming up, you would see that reflected. It is a limitation here that these are like token patterns methods. So basically, we have a back of word assumption, which
Mhm.
from like data might
Yeah.
already challenging, but from an NLP perspective is obviously sort of a very simplistic assumption to all the complexity would have, like something like higher level topics, which might be like a toxicity or even order, sequence order or something. So I think there's still a lot of cool stuff to explore uh,
Yeah.
to better highlight and also from a user perspective to better support users so that they don't need to like sift through patterns and come up themselves with, oh, this is suddenly toxic, and instead get it presented like, oh, toxicity.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I promised a suggestion, but I definitely am going to reach out to you by email, but just also kind of to um, uh, give a teaser to everyone on what I am doing. I will have I like with the team from TU Darmstadt and TU Hamburg. We'll have a semi shared task next year on narrative story similarities.
Mhm.
So we have collected a data set that consists of three stories. One of them is the anchor story, and the other one is similar to the anchor one, and the third one is less similar. So that is something that you might be interested in taking a look, and we have some ideas to follow up this dataset collection because essentially the shared task paper is dataset collection
Mhm.
paper. Maybe if you don't mind, I will reach out to you with some ideas where we could play with it a little bit.
Definitely feel free to reach out. Sounds super cool. And yeah, this is one paper, but it's actually like a series with like longer
Hmm,
projects, and we have some follow-up work also. So would be super cool. Sounds super cool. Please feel free to reach out. And we
sounds
also,
amazing.
for the others who might want to use it, we're like currently also writing like Jupyter Notebook tutorials and so on. So to make it
Very cool.
easier to try out.
Um, right. Um, so I still don't see any questions in the chat, but I think we can move on and then invite the second speaker for today. And if there are some questions, they will follow up by email, hopefully. Thank you, Michael, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Then the second talk would be delivered by Zhijing.
Yes,
The
I
floor is
enjoyed
yours.
Michael's talk very much, and thank you very much for organizing this Pre ACL event. I second Michael's idea that we should have in-person gathering too. Yes, so today I'm zooming from Tübingen and Germany, and I talk about LLM interpretability and interpreting human decisions by LLMs. I am also an incoming assistant professor at the University of Toronto, so it covers work that's both from my Toronto group and our Max Planck Institute group. So first, to give an overview of all our papers at ACL 2025, although we will pick two to introduce. So we have one work on revealing the hidden mechanisms of cross-country content moderation. And we will also cover a work on LM interpretability, on reasoning memorization interplay. And the two works that I recommend people to look up are one on DARS stars framework to enhance coding agent performance, and also an effort towards global AI inclusivity by including a large-scale multilingual AI terminology data. So let's dive into the LM interpretability and interpreting human decisions by LLMs. The first study we covered looks into the reasoning memorization interplay in LLMs via a single direction in its representation space. So starting with the motivation, a lot of discussions in the NLP community is centered around whether the models are really doing reasoning or they're actually memorizing a training data. So this distinction can be applied to disentangle LM performance on like whether their benchmark performance really reflects transferable reasoning skills or some memory-based performance or so-called data contamination problem. The earlier results in our lab has covered like how to explain multi-step reasoning by mechanistic interpretability, and also a causal framework to understand what causes model performance. I guess analogous to what Michael has mentioned about the name bias, we look into the number bias and also framing bias. And then diving into this study, we basically focus on the research question on first, whether memorization and reasoning are two abilities that are separable or they're inseparable. The other is, if we can separate them, can we identify a steering vector within model's representation that can control this switch on encouraging more memorization behavior versus reasoning? One example here is, for example, we can separate existing NLP datasets to memory-heavy ones versus reasoning-heavy ones. For the memory-heavy ones, can be polarization is a property of, or colors in a soap bubble result from light. And then the reasoning tasks can be very decomposable, such as inserting various different numbers and let the model order it from the greatest to the least. Or what's the strength of a 13C 90-degree pulse of a duration of 1 millisecond, and so on. These very sort of mathematical or STEM-related reasoning questions. So what we do here is basically we separate LM datasets into memory-heavy ones and reasoning-heavy ones, extract the representation in the residual stream of the models, and then get the difference in means across the representations in the memory tasks versus reasoning tasks. And then we get a linear reasoning feature. So just to visualize the type of task that we're doing, as mentioned, we put MMLU, GSM 8K, and so on into the reasoning set. And then we put other things into the memorization set. Then we sort of motivate the study by first plotting their embedding space into the into a projection, and then do see that the orange or red colored ones are memory heavy tasks. They're clearly separable from reasoning heavy tasks across multiple models from Llama to Gamma and Mistral and Omo. Then we sort of look into, let me skip this slide, it's a slightly more technical. And then we also can see such separation on coding tasks when we separate a memorization heavy coding and a reasoning heavy coding task. Then we also have an intervention experiment after discovering this steering vector, making the models memorize more versus reason more. We basically evaluate models' performance on the same separation of two types of data sets and tune the steering vector to maximize its memorization ability, and do observe that data sets such as MMLU Pro M, PopQA, CEVAL-H observe an increase of model performance by, let's say, on using Llama, then it can be 7% increase for MMLU Pro M, and so on. I guess like this M, we use it to sort of separate the nature of the tasks to be memorization heavy or reasoning heavy here. Similarly, we also shift the residual stream towards the reasoning direction more, and then observed that the model also have increased the performance on a set of data sets that requires either mathematical reasoning or common sense reasoning skills. And in terms of the takeaways for this first paper, we show that reasoning capability is mediated by a set of linear features in its activation space across the layers. And then they can enhance the generalizability when they're solving reasoning tasks if we steer these factors. And also mediating on these linear representation features can reduce reasoning errors and misapplication of model reasoning or memorization ability. Then the next study we will cover here, well, here is the paper and code link. The next study we will cover here is on revealing hidden mechanisms of cross-country content moderation with NLP. And we're shifting from the scope of given an LLM that can perform certain tasks, how do we sort of separate its different types of abilities, to now that we purely use LLM as a tool for computational social science and understand how content moderation decisions are made. So in terms of motivation here, basically we are targeting our model at social media data. And as we know, many moderation systems either have black box NLP models or have an opaque human moderation mechanisms. There is a lack of transparency in why certain content is censored. And also, if we deploy naive surface level keyword-based filters, they're often misleading. Plus, there exist variations of censorship across countries and time that is not easy to have in one-size-fits-all model to interpret. And so here, the main contribution that we do in this paper is to focus on the goal of interpreting how online social media content moderation decisions are made through the two research questions. First, on whether LLMs can reverse engineer moderation decisions across different countries, where we train LLM-based classifiers to predict censorship decisions across 5 countries, to reveal geopolitical variation in content moderation behavior. And then the second research question is whether explainable AI techniques can be applied to LLMs to reveal the underlying mechanisms of content moderation decisions. And then here we basically apply Shapley values and also LM-generated explanations to identify key factors that drives moderation and validate their interpretability through human evaluation. Diving into the first part, to prepare for this interpretation of actual social media moderation decision, we look into a data set that captures 1% of all the tweets from 2011 to 2020. Basically, this source also looks at whether a tweet is censored in a certain country. So then having this snapshot, we show the distribution of sort of highly censoring countries that, for example, we have 39,000 tweets from Germany that's censored in Germany, but can be seen in other countries. 36,000 from France, 5,000 from India, 37,000 from Turkey, close to 5,000 from Russia as well. And then we basically, among all these tweets, like Twitter posts, and also there's like the number of words per post is around 20 per post. And then among them, we have the censored ones being 16% of that, or around that number for Germany, France, and Turkey, and around 2% for India and Russia. So that's our data composition from actual human social media data. And then here's a snapshot of the type of tweets that has been withheld within the country that's labeled here. Some of them are censored because of its harmfulness, and some of them are basically some military implications or political, censorship, as in the Indian tweet and so on. There can also be pure corporate censorship things. So bring this further, we try to understand what type of data. We first have an overview on basic topic modeling and categorization techniques to investigate what's the portion of different natures of censorship in each country's data. So we saw that there is a large set of political censorship for India and Turkey, which is the driving type of censorship on Twitter during that decade. And then there is also a pretty large religions censorship contents, as well as for Germany and France, the dominating censored area is harmfulness, including racism, hate speech, and so on. Bring this forward, then we go to the first task, evaluating the performance of fine-tuned models. Basically, we apply a list of language models to reverse engineer the human censorship decisions, given the label, the data with ground truth label of whether they're actually censored or not. And then after fine-tuning models, we find that their test set performance can be up to over 90% F1 score. And then we also further use the model that sort of runs over all the country's data and with an F1 score of 93% for our further explainability analysis. And also we contrasted the model performance to if we apply some off-the-shelf language models in a zero-shot way, they actually cannot do the task very well and have varying performance that's pretty low. Then we bring the models that learn these censorship patterns to our explainability analysis, where, for example, using Shapley value analysis, we see that events like anti-religious speech and political and harmful content are censored for Germany and France, and also military and political censorship has been prevalent in Turkey, and so on for other countries. Further, bring it ahead to whether LLMs can explain the censorship decisions well. We basically let a set of LLMs from Aya Llama to GPT-4o Mini to explain, given the censorship decision, can you come up with some rationale explaining why it has been moderated on Twitter? So we basically let human annotators to rate on a Likert scale from 1 to 5 on how fluent the model's explanation is and how helpful it is to explain these decisions, and find that Aya 23 ranked highest in preference ratings and also helpfulness and fluency in several cases. Moving further, we have one discussion, maybe 1 to 2 discussion points that first, the model's censorship decisions are highly predictable with like over 90% F1 or accuracy that can recover the original human decisions. However, the explainability that we can provide still face challenges, and there could be more transparency studies here. And Also, LLMs lack cultural, legal, and linguistic specificity, which also leads to, I guess we will just show a preview of our study on sort of also trying to make like AI research a bit more approachable to different types of audiences. So we do have this one that we welcome people to look up, where we have a multilingual terminology data set across 5 languages, like translating common terms to Arabic, Chinese, French, Japanese, Russian, such as things on like co-reference resolution, explain-away effect, and other AI-related terms. Yes, that's all, and we welcome people to check out the papers or welcome any discussions.
Thank you, Zhijing, for the presentation. Do we have any questions? Is anyone up to ask a question on the chat or so to say live? If not, I do have a question, but it might be a little bit politically loaded or controversial. So from what I saw, your results kind of show that Russia is doing the less censorship across 5 countries that you explored in this Twitter study, right? But
Yeah.
actually, Twitter is absolutely banned in Russia for last 5 years, so they do
Right.
not need to do any censorship. They kind of they block the whole thing. So these results, they're overly optimistic because essentially no one who is based under Russian API or Russian IP, they can access this data.
Right. So I think basically there is a selection bias in terms of the Russian set.
Yeah.
And we just truly reflect on if we get a random set of Twitter posts, then what are the censorship decisions? So, and also as we can see, some of them are corporate censorship, which is actually not the mainstream one for Russia. Yeah,
I didn't
probably
have a
like,
chance to
yeah.
look at this. Well, from this tweet, from what I see,
Mm-hmm.
um, what
So
I
probably try to
can,
ban some
I can double guess, but
Mhm.
I would assume that some of this corporate stuff, they're just some letter or character combinations that are obscene words in Russian written in Latin.
Mhm.
I cannot guess what exactly here happened, but I might assume that SB might be something related to a very big Russian corporate bank.
Mhm.
That's questionable, but if you share more data with me at some point, and if you want like a human look on into some reasoning, I can definitely do this because I'm native speaker.
Sounds great. Yeah, I think we're happy to communicate and share the data as well. I think it should probably also be on GitHub. And
Mhm.
this probably talks still the most about the other countries where Germany
Yeah, yeah.
has certain social order to maintain, whereas like the other cases might have a bit more political censorship topics. Yes, but happy to discuss more in detail later.
Yeah, definitely. So, I just wanted to say that probably these results should be taken with a grain of salt because of larger censorship measures introduced at the country level. Um, I don't see any questions in chat, so maybe again people will follow up by email or even reach out to you at ACL in person. Hopefully, we have some ACL attendees here too. And thank you again for your talk and wishing you the best time at SAL next week. And we have our third speaker now. If I may invite you, Lukas, the floor is yours. Oh, that's beautiful. Um, We can't hear you, Lucas. We can see your screen and the
Yeah,
beautiful.
there
Yeah.
we go. Okay. All right. Thank you for the compliment. Yeah, so as you might have guessed, I'm presenting a poster. Do I hide this top bar thing?
Would you be able to zoom into different segments of
Yeah,
the
of course.
poster? Yeah.
Won't
Okay, cool.
hide the top bar of the Zoom thing, but it is getting in the way of me zooming in and out.
That poster would be perfect for November conference.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Or end of October conference.
Okay, well, I don't know how to hide this, but I guess I'll just zoom in like this. All right. Hello.
Yeah, that works.
So yes, my name is Lukas Edman. I did this work with Helmut Schmidt at LMU and Alex Fraser at TUM. And if you're familiar with my previous benchmark, Qt, this is the sort of extended version. So if you're not familiar with it, it is basically right here. Hopefully that's big enough to read. Um, Whoa, okay, there we go. So essentially what we did in Qt was we tested LLM's ability to understand characters within tokens. So you might have heard of this strawberry problem, how many R's are in strawberry. So this was essentially kind of what we were doing here in Qt, but a little bit more in depth. So we asked questions like, is there a C in the word there? And the model should just answer no. And then we also do a comparison on the word level. Is there a the in the sky is blue? And you should answer yes. And the idea with this is that there will be a single token, right? So there's no direct access to the individual characters within each token, but there is access to the tokens within a sentence because those are all split up. So we presume that the model should be performing better on the word level than on the character level. And so we do other tasks as well, like manipulation. So adding a B after every E in there. So the model should hopefully be able to do that. And on the word level as well, and then deletion, substitution, swapping. And so, yeah, these portions were what were in the original Qt benchmark. And we essentially found that the models perform better at the word level than on the character level. They really struggled. And so we did this for English in Qt, and execute is the multilingual version. So we wanted to see how does the model do with other languages, particularly other scripts, because you can sort of imagine that the results might be very similar in other Latin scripts, but how are they going to do for languages like Chinese or Japanese, where the tokens are whole words a lot of the time, right? So we expand this to the most widely used 8 scripts, and here are the results. So just to recap for English, we have very good performance on spelling and inverse spelling, but the performance really degrades when we go to these manipulation tasks, particularly on the character level. So for the word level, it's actually doing very well, but at the character level, it's performing particularly poorly at insertion and swapping. And these are for a bunch of models. So in the Qt paper, we tested a bunch of monolingual models, and here we're testing a bunch of multilingual models. And it doesn't matter. They perform badly anyway. So the same we can find as well for Russian and Arabic, presumably because they're somewhat similar in the number of characters per token. They're around like 4 to 5 characters per token in Arabic and Russian, which is about the same as English. And they're also pretty high resource, and there's also a lot of languages that share their scripts in Cyrillic and Arabic. But then we go to other languages like Hindi and Korean, we see that the character level performance is a little bit better than it was previously. And this is probably because in these languages, the character to token ratio is about like 3 to 1. So it's a little bit closer. But then in Chinese and Japanese, if you go the complete other direction, where each character is essentially a word, and the tokenization is following that as well, we see that the performance on the character level is actually quite good, and then the word level performance drops. And then we have Amharic over here, which seems to be just good at everything. So if you're not familiar with Amharic, it's language spoken in Ethiopia. It's very widely spoken language there, but as you might guess, it's quite under-resourced in NLP. And so not only does the model not see a lot of Amharic during training, but it also just doesn't tokenize it well. So it actually tokenizes it very poorly, such that every 3 tokens is a single character. So that's very bad. But nevertheless, we see very good performance. So what's going on there? Well, we looked at more low resource languages and found the exact same thing. Particularly, I should say, low resource languages with their own scripts. So Tamazight is like a Berber language. They have their own script. Santali is a East Indian language, if I remember correctly. It also has its own script. And they also perform quite well on these tasks. And essentially, why this is happening is because these LLMs have what I call language bias, in the sense that if we go back to the tasks here, if you think about a task like character deletion, like delete every E in there, and the output should be THR. This is the intended output, but the LLM probably doesn't want to produce something like this because it's not a word. And similarly, in the is sky is blue, the model really doesn't want to produce this because it's not grammatically correct. And so we see that kind of language bias, this sort of bias towards grammatical correctness and correct spelling, occur a lot in the languages that it knows well. But then we see that, with the languages it doesn't know well, it just sort of does the task correctly because it's not influenced by this bias. And we even show this to really drive the point home. Here's the regular English for comparison. We do a cipher, basically taking the English and doing a one-to-one mapping of the English characters to Amharic characters, and then just trying the tasks again with the Amharic characters, and it does perfectly well. So it's very clearly the case that there's a language bias, which is more than what was just going on in the sort of findings that we found in the Qt paper, where, of course, if you have like a character inside of a token, it has difficulty sort of understanding that, but there's also this language bias getting in the way. So that's the main takeaway from this work. And then finally, we have these results on Korean, Chinese, and Japanese. If we go up to these tasks are what we're looking at specifically. So the special thing about CJK languages is that they all have this composition where the characters themselves are made up of smaller parts of characters, components. For example, here in Korean, you have the word do, which is made up of the D, the U, and the L, essentially. And so we can do something like our spelling task, where we're splitting up the token into multiple tokens, and do the reverse as well. And then also our contains task. So is the D in do, basically. And what we find here is the same as sort of what we were finding with the rest of the with like English and such, is that it does not understand the parts that are contained within the tokens. So it seems to be relatively good at recognizing whether a Kangxi radical is in a Chinese character or in a Japanese kanji, but it's not able to make this sort of translation between the two. And then for Korean, it's okay, but it's not perfect. And even we tested models like Quen, which has a very large amount of data for all of these languages, and it does perform the best, but it's still struggling quite a bit. So all in all, that's basically the takeaway is that, one, these models have difficulty understanding these parts of their tokens, whether it's the components of a character, components of a word, and two, they have this language bias that prevents them from performing perfectly. So yeah, thank you. And I'm open for questions now.
Thank you so much, Lukas. It was super interesting. Do I have any questions on chat, or does anyone want to ask a question?
Well, I'll add one more thing, which is go
Okay.
to my GitHub and try out the benchmark. Because another thing that I forgot to mention actually is that we made it such that you can extend this benchmark easily to whatever language that you would like. So all you really need is a sort of halfway decent translator, such as like Google Translate, or you could have manual translation of 1,000 sentences or so, and then you can just have this benchmark for whatever language that you'd like. So yeah. All right.
Um, cool. Thank you. If no one has a question, I will ask probably the dumbest thing ever. But is there any connection to downstream performance in those languages? Like, okay, we know this. We have observed this stuff in a number of languages, but
Mhm.
what does it mean for other use cases of LLMs?
So it definitely has effect on downstream performance of sort of specific tasks, maybe not the most common ones, because the most common ones are usually to do with things like morphology. And morphology can be very complicated in certain languages, of course, but it ultimately comes down to a handful of rules. And so it doesn't generally come up in that sense. But it does come up in more niche places, like in word puzzles. So, you could try to give
Mhm.
ChatGPT a Wordle problem, and it would struggle because it would have some issues with, like where the characters are, in which positions, and just understanding in general. So one thing that these models have been starting to do a bit better is like kind of converting in and out of like this representation to this representation within their reasoning. So reasoning definitely helps a lot. But it's not perfect and they'll still make mistakes. So more complicated stuff like, yeah, word puzzles, coding exercises as well, which is that can come up there as well. And then poetry and stuff like this, where you have these kind of like rhyming or alliteration and stuff like this that it can happen there too.
I was wondering if it's also somehow valuable for bioinformatics and non-language data where you work with DNA sequences that are, don't remember, 4 character and then larger tokens that build proteins or something. Honestly, no idea, but maybe
Yeah.
that is also like, right.
We've
Are
actually
we?
talked to some people about this who are working at TUM on bioinformatics, and they were telling us basically that the typical thing is for these models to consider like these codons, like these set of three or a set of 6 characters at a time. And then, yeah, there's no like consideration for the individual characters, which is maybe not the standard way to think about things I guess, in bioinformatics, but it could still be very relevant, particularly
Yeah,
to how a protein folds, for example, because that's
yeah.
also a chain of amino acids, right? So yeah, there is actually some interest in doing this. I think it's part of the reason that it hasn't fully caught on in NLP, for example, is because it's generally more expensive to consider everything on the character level. So it means you have a longer sequence, which means you have to um, compute more and you can compute slower as well because you're probably generating character by character in that circumstance as well if you're doing generation. So it's definitely a thing that I think people are getting interested in, but maybe it's still a little bit hampered by computational power. Yeah, good question though.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the answer. And luckily, we have um, 2 questions on chat by Thomas. So, first of all, Thomas asked if these findings are persistent over a different LLM model. So, if they're robust towards a model change. And
Yeah.
then,
Mhm.
how did you translate the task question to these more esoteric languages? Which
Uh,
of those are esoteric? I don't know. Maybe Amharic.
Yeah, so maybe he can clarify what he means by esoteric in the meantime, but related to the first question, this is definitely robust across LLMs. So you do see different performance in different LLMs. So for example, of course, the Quen models do quite well on Chinese, and what I'm showing here actually is the best results from any of the 5 model families that we get. So this is like peak performance essentially. But we're testing Quen, Llama, Gemma, Mistral, and Aya as well. And so we generally see, I think the best performance is actually Quen across the board in general. But yeah, it's mostly the same. So the performance is really like very consistent per language, I would say. So except for the cases like Quen where it just does better in Chinese. Yeah. And sorry, yeah, what is the second question again? What was that again? Can you remind me?
So the second question was about how did you translate the task question to the esoteric languages that are the graphs on the left side?
How did I translate them? Like, how did I get the data for it? Or
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
okay. So we used Google Translate. It's not good, I will admit. And this part could also be sort of serving our point of like having language bias because indeed the translation will also just be not necessarily grammatically correct. But we're quite sure that these models have not seen any like Tamazight or Santali. And we actually have an Amharic speaker in our group as well, so we could actually confirm like the level of like the quality of the translations. And there were definitely mistakes, but it wasn't so bad that we thought it was completely useless. So so there are mistakes every now and again, but actually I think around the majority is correct, just without any errors. And then the errors that we're making were like very consistent, like grammatical things that it was not technically incorrect, but it's just not how a person would normally say it, I think, to put it that way. So yeah, but I do not know particularly about the quality of these two. So I assume that it's much worse for these two, though.
All right. Thank you, Lucas, again. I don't think we have any more questions by now, but again, I think all of our 3 speakers are available to answer, and we'll happily take questions by email if somebody is interested. So I suggest we wrap it up here. Thank you, all 3 of you again for joining us today. And we're wishing you fun next week at the conference for everyone who is attending. Thank you, guys, and bye-bye.